All right, so today we're diving into a pretty big question.
Oh, yeah.
What if the UK abolished the monarchy? I mean, we all saw the whole coronation thing last year with King Charles, all those golden carriages.
Huge spectacle.
It was lots of waving crowds, but,
Not everyone was thrilled.
exactly. There were protests, even some arrests. Made you wonder if maybe, just maybe, not everyone's on board with the whole monarchy thing anymore.
Yeah.
So we've got reports from Insider, Sky News, the BBC, even some expert commentary to dig into. Should be pretty interesting.
Definitely. It's interesting because, the coronation was this global media event, but it also I don't know, it kind of highlighted some tensions that are bubbling under the surface. Like those arrests of anti-monarchy protesters, they sparked this whole debate about freedom of expression in the UK.
Right, and I mean, peaceful protest, that's kind of a core part of any democracy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So to see those arrests happening, especially during the coronation, it felt, I don't know, a bit off, maybe.
Yeah, it definitely raised some eyebrows. And then to make matters worse, Graham Smith, he is the leader of that group, Republic, he came out and publicly called out King Charles for not even apologizing for the incident.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
It definitely added fuel to the fire. Though the Metropolitan Police, they did express regret later on and confirm there wouldn't be any further action taken against those arrested.
Right.
But even so, it made you wonder, are these protests just a one-off thing, or are they pointing to something bigger?
That's the big question, right? And when you look at the polling data, it starts to feel like maybe those protests weren't just isolated incidents. There was a YouGov poll last year, and it found that overall, yeah, support for the monarchy is still there, but the generational divide, it's pretty shocking.
Okay, shocking how. Give me the numbers.
Only 32%, that's it, of 18 to 24-year-olds support the monarchy. And you compare that to, say, folks 65 and older, 78% support.
Wow, okay, yeah, that's a huge gap. What is going on with Gen Z? Are they just over the whole royal family thing?
It's complicated, but there's definitely a growing sense of, I don't know, maybe indifference is the word, especially among the younger generations. Even if you just look at the numbers, how many people watched the coronation versus Queen Elizabeth's funeral? 18.8 million for Charles's big day, but over 26 million tuned in for the Queen's funeral.
Yeah, that is a pretty big difference. You know, it's funny. I was reading a piece by a journalist, Tiwa Adebayo, and she was talking about this crisis of indifference and suggesting it might be tied to the whole cost of living crisis that's going on. Like when people are struggling to make ends meet, maybe a fancy coronation feels a little, I don't know, out of touch.
Yeah, definitely. There's maybe a disconnect there between the institution of the monarchy and, the everyday lives of a lot of people, especially younger folks. But let's say, just for fun, that this indifference keeps growing and support for the monarchy, it really plummets. How do you even get rid of a monarchy? It's not like voting someone out of office, right?
Exactly. I was wondering that how does it actually work? Is there like a referendum or something?
It's way more complicated than people think. Marlene Koenig, she's a royal historian. She's written a ton about this. And she says it needs an act of parliament, which is already a pretty big hurdle. But then there's another twist. You also need the monarch's signature.
Wait, hold on. You're saying the monarch can actually block their own removal? That's crazy.
It seems counterintuitive, right?
Sure.
But it shows just how deeply embedded the monarchy is in the whole fabric of the UK's government. Getting rid of it wouldn't be easy, that's for sure. You'd need a massive shift in public opinion and in the government.
So, just for kicks,
Right.
let's say that happens. The stars align, the monarchy's abolished. What happens to all this stuff? I mean, Buckingham Palace alone, 775 rooms. What do you do with a place like that?
That's where it gets really interesting. You've got this iconic building steeped in history, and suddenly its purpose is just up in the air. Right now, it's an official residence. It's used for state events, those big royal weddings. They even open it to the public in the summer sometimes. But if there's no monarchy, who knows?
It'd be a blank slate, 775 rooms, maybe a museum, all about royal history, that kind of thing. Government offices, maybe. Or, hear me out on this one, luxury apartments.
Ooh, now you're thinking.
Penthouse suite at Buckingham Palace, come on.
What's cool is it forces you to think about what these spaces are for and how they could be totally reimagined. You're talking about reshaping the landscape, literally and figuratively.
That's such a good point. And it's not just buildings, is it? I mean, abolishing the monarchy would have ripple effects throughout British society. Like pulling a thread on a tapestry, the whole thing could unravel.
You're absolutely right. We've barely scratched the surface here. There's so much more to unpack. But for now, let's maybe zoom in on those ripple effects you mentioned because, we're not just talking about changing a figurehead. We're talking about potentially transforming the very fabric of the UK.
So we've been talking about what it would take to actually get rid of the monarchy. But what about the day-to-day stuff, like running the country? I mean, the queen or the king, I guess, is technically head of state, right?
Right, exactly. And that's like one of the biggest things they'd have to figure out if they abolish the monarchy. You can't just get rid of an institution that's been so connected to the government for centuries without figuring out like what replaces it.
So help me understand this. No more monarch, then what? Who's in charge?
Well, most likely the UK would become a republic, which means they'd need a president. But even that, something that sounds simple, it brings up a ton of questions like how do they choose a president? Would people vote directly or would parliament decide? And what kind of power would a president even have compared to like the monarch now?
It's crazy to think about like restructuring a whole system of government. You're basically like rewriting the rule book.
Exactly. And it's not just that. Think about all the laws and traditions, all those institutions that are tied to the monarchy. They'd all have to be looked at, maybe changed or replaced to fit this new republic thing. It's a huge project.
And what about all the other countries involved? Like the Commonwealth. King Charles, he's the head of state for 15 other countries, right? Like Canada, Australia, New Zealand. What happens to them if the UK gets rid of the monarchy? Do they automatically become republics too?
That's a really good question, and it's something that people who study this stuff have been talking about for years. There's no easy answer because each of those Commonwealth countries would have to decide for themselves. Some might say, okay, we'll become a republic too, but others might do something totally different, cut ties with the UK system entirely.
So it could be like a domino effect around the world, all starting with what happens in the UK. That's pretty wild.
Yeah, for sure. And on top of all the political stuff, there's the money side of things, the monarchy. It's a huge tourist attraction for the UK. People come from all over and spend billions of pounds every year. They want to see Buckingham Palace, the changing of the guard, all the fancy stuff that goes with the royal family.
It's true. You can't deny it. Even me, I'm not even British, but I'm fascinated by it all. It's like this unique part of their culture, their history. Could the UK really keep all that tourism going without the monarchy, though?
That's hard to say, but it's a challenge for sure. Without the royal family, they'd have to figure out new ways to bring people in to make that money, maybe focus on all that history, the art and music scene, the beautiful landscapes.
I like that, showing the UK is more than just royalty. But let's be real, some things would just be different without a monarchy, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Some traditions and institutions would change or even disappear. Like, think about the changing of the guard at Buckingham Palace. Would it even mean the same thing if the royal family wasn't living there? And then there's all the charities and arts organizations that the royals support. That whole system would have to change.
It makes you think if you take away all the fancy ceremonies and stuff, what's left? What makes Britain, well, British without the monarchy?
That's a deep question, and I think it's one that the British people themselves would have to answer. It gets to their identity, their heritage, what they're proud of as a nation.
It sounds like we're talking about a huge change in how the UK sees itself.
Exactly. Getting rid of the monarchy wouldn't just be about changing who's in charge. It would be about figuring out what it means to be British in, like, the 21st century.
So we've talked about what would happen to the government, the ripple effects for the Commonwealth, and the money the UK might lose from tourism. But there's also the whole legal side of things. How do you even start taking apart a system that's been around for so long?
That's where things get really complicated. It would involve, like, untangling all these laws and traditions and precedents that have built up over time. Remember earlier we were talking about how a monarch can technically block their own removal?
Yeah, that was crazy. You need the monarch's signature to abolish the monarchy. That seems a bit backwards.
Right. That just shows how deeply embedded the monarchy is in the UK's legal system. To actually change that, you'd need all these acts of parliament, maybe even a whole constitutional amendment.
So it's not just about public opinion or what politicians want. It's about navigating this whole legal maze.
Exactly. And that could take years, maybe even decades. There would be court cases and debates and negotiations every step of the way.
Sounds like a lawyer's dream. Or their worst nightmare, I guess, depending on how you look at it. But besides all the legal stuff, what happens to all the stuff the royals own? The palaces, the land, the art, all of it.
We're talking about a huge amount of assets, stuff that they've been collecting for hundreds of years. And figuring out what to do with all that. If there's no monarchy, that's another huge legal mess.
So who gets to keep the crown jewels? Does Buckingham Palace become government property? Do they, like, auction off the royal corgis?
Those are the big questions, and there's no simple answer. Some people say all that stuff belongs to the nation and should be, nationalized. But others think the royal family should be able to keep at least some of their private wealth. It'd be a long and messy process, probably with years of legal battles.
Okay, so basically, getting rid of the monarchy would be a huge project. Lots of political, economic, and legal obstacles along the way. But let's, shift gears for a second. What about the human side of all this?
You mean what happens to the royal family themselves?
Exactly. What happens to all those dukes and duchesses and princes if there's no more monarchy? Do they just become, regular people? Can you imagine Prince William, waiting in line at the DMV?
That's a funny thought. It's hard to say what would happen because, well, this kind of thing has never happened in the UK before. But we can, speculate a little.
Okay, so let's have some fun with this. No more crowns, no more palaces. What's life like for, ex-royals? What happens to their titles, their fancy houses? Do they even get to keep all those corgis?
Well, the corgis are probably safe, but the titles and houses, that's a different story. Legally, it's like uncharted territory, but a lot of experts think Parliament would have to, step in, make some new laws about all that. Maybe they lose their official titles. Maybe there are some rules about their money. It really depends on how they do this whole abolishing thing.
It's crazy to think about going for your Royal Highness to just, Mr. and Mrs. Must be a big adjustment.
Oh, for sure. It'd be a huge change. Their whole life, their identity. Some of them, maybe they'd be happy about it, a chance to have a normal life out of the spotlight. But others, they might use all their connections, maybe start new careers, business, charity, maybe even entertainment.
I can see it now, the headlines. Prince William launches a new line of, I don't know, organic teas, or Duchess Kate opens a corgi grooming salon. Okay, maybe not the tea, but you get what I mean.
I get it. It's fun to think about, right? But besides all that, there's also the question of what happens to all that royal money. The family, they own all this land, art, valuable stuff they've collected for, centuries.
It's a ton of money we're talking about. So in this no monarchy world, who gets to keep it?
It's complicated. It's all tied up with legal stuff, history. Some people say it all belongs to the country, that it should be, nationalized, belong to everyone. But others think the family should be able to keep at least some of their own money. It'd be a long and messy fight, probably, with lawyers arguing about it for years.
So even if everyone decided they wanted to get rid of the monarchy, it sounds like it wouldn't be quick or easy, like this giant legal puzzle to figure out.
Exactly. And there's no easy answers.
Yeah.
It makes you think about some really deep stuff. What does a country owe to its past? What's tradition really worth? How do you balance, what people need now with what happened a long time ago?
Big questions. That's what I like about these deep dives. Makes you think about things differently.
Definitely. And even though we've been talking about, a what-if scenario, it shows you something about power, privilege, how societies change. It makes you think about those institutions that we just, assume will always be there, maybe imagine different ways things could be.
Well, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground today. Explored what might happen if the UK abolished the monarchy, the politics, the economics, even the personal stuff, the culture. Talked about how public opinion is shifting, how hard it is to change a constitution, and what might happen to Buckingham Palace, even those royal corgis.
A lot of info, some guesswork, but one thing's for sure. What happens to the monarchy, it's not set in stone at all.
And that's what makes it so interesting. So here's a question for you. What do you think? Would the UK be better off without a monarchy? Or is all that tradition and history worth holding on to? Something to think about. And, if you're interested, there's a ton more to learn about this. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.